Hello, I'm Marvin Kalb, and in just a moment, an hour of live, unedited, unrehearsed conversation with Senator Bob Dole of Kansas, a Republican candidate for President of the United States. Stay with us for Candidates 88, coming right up.
This series is made possible by a grant from the New York Stock Exchange Foundation as a public educational service.
From the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University. Candidates 88 with Marvin Kalb. This week, a conversation with Bob Dole.
Welcome to the John F. Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University. I'm Marvin Kalb, director of the Joan Shorenstein Barone Center on the Press, Politics, and Public Policy. It used to be said in American political circles that the Democrats had all of the fun. Well, now the Republicans are trying to get their fair share. And the American public is left to wonder about the on-again, off-again struggle and warfare between the Vice President of the United States, George Bush, and the Senate Minority Leader, Bob Dole. We cannot talk to the Vice President for a variety of reasons, but the Senate Minority Leader is here, and we'll talk to him about the Vice President and much else. But first, a little bit about the senior senator from Kansas. Robert Joseph Dole is 64 years of age. Occupation, Republican senator, presidential candidate. Hometown, Russell, Kansas. Family, married to Elizabeth Dole, one child from a previous marriage. Education, attended the universities of Kansas and Arizona, and got a BA and a law degree from Washburn Municipal University in Topeka, 1952. Military service, captain, U.S. Army, 1943 to 1948, wounded in Italy, 1945, twice decorated for heroic achievement. Career, state representative in Kansas, 1951 to 53, Russell County Attorney, 1953 to 61, U.S. Representative, 1961 to 69, fourth-term U.S. Senator, 1969 to now, plus Republican nominee for Vice President in 1976, and candidate for President in 1980, and once again in 1988. Let us now welcome Senator Bob Dole of Kansas. You are now obviously in a graduate school of government, and many of the students here are probably going to choose a career in public service. Now, you've been in politics, which some people say is a form of public service, for more than 30 years. And I wonder on the plus side, what you could tell them about the kind of things they can look forward to in public service.
Well, you can't look forward to making any money. So you start off on that basis. That's not important anyway, really. But I think if you're interested in public service, and I know many here are, there are a lot of opportunities to not only help other people, to play pivotal roles in our relationships with other countries around the world. So it depends on whether you're looking for foreign service or something in the domestic field, maybe even politics. I mean, that is good public service, and I find a lot of outstanding men and women in politics in both parties.
What about the downside? What can you warn them about?
Well, you have to have a fairly thick skin, particularly if you get in the political side. My mother never could understand those nasty letters to the editor that people wrote about me, or the ones I wrote about others. You know, that.
You've just released to the public your tax records for the last 21 years, and a lot of people would say that's a very private matter and really not the public's business, but yet you felt the need to do it. Why?
Well, George Bush suggested we do that out in Iowa a couple of weeks ago, or about 10 days ago, and I didn't know it was just aimed at me, but apparently it was. So I called him and raised him. I said, he wanted 10 years. I said, let's go for 21. So now I want to see his next 11 years. But I think it is important. If there's anybody has any question about what we've done, what we may have, any investments we may have made or anything of that kind, they can take a look at my tax return since 1965. And I think that's gives you a pretty good cross-section, and they're all out there. So people
you think, Senator, that the public is now demanding too much of its public officials?
Oh, I don't think so. I mean, I think once we step into the arena, I don't say we lose all of our rights of privacy, but I think once we step into the arena, we're going to be closely scrutinized, everything we've ever done, any transaction. If you're in the Congress and you're running for some other office, president, you're going to be your voting record as it should be. I think sometimes the media struggles with it too. They don't know just how far to go. We certainly have some, as I said, some rights of privacy, but I don't see it going over the line yet.
Well, I think on that basis, I'm free to ask you virtually any question.
And I'm free not to answer.
Okay. I would like to recall for you a conversation that the two of us had, a brief one, during a taping of Meet the Press a year or two ago. I said at that time that it was my impression that there are two Bob Doles almost at war in the same person. And there is the Bob Dole we see today who talks about compassionate issues and about the poor and the disadvantaged and broadening the base of the Republican Party. And there is the Bob Dole that at least some of us in this audience remember from 1976, who accused the Democrats of instigating, in effect, 3 wars, 1.5 million Americans killed in those Democrat wars. The question is a simple one, Senator. Which is the real Bob Dole?
Well, I think I know, but I hope everyone else understands. You have to play a role. I mean, whatever you are, Democrat or Republican. In 1976, I was on the ticket with Gerald Ford. We were, depending on what polls you looked at, 10 points, 20 points, 35 points behind when we left Kansas City. We had just a very short time, 9 weeks to catch up, and I was sent out into the briar patch. And obviously my role, as Jerry Ford says in his book, President Ford, was to go into the briar patch and keep Carter and Mondale on their toes. And I think I did a pretty good job of that. But I think when you do that, you're carrying, I was the heavy. And I didn't shrink from it, but I must say that I didn't think that was the real Bob Dole. I really believe now I can set the tone. I'm the candidate for president. I'm not the running mate. I'm the candidate. And what I say and what I do, in my view, is the real Bob Dole. Where I am on the issues, what my record is, certainly I think would underscore that.
And you did not then feel at the time that the Democrats were in fact responsible for the last 3 wars and that the deaths of 1.5 million Americans were their responsibility and fault?
No, I don't know that it came out quite that way.
Pretty short.
Yeah, pretty shorthand way. But we've been the party of poverty, according to the Democrats. You know, Herbert Hoover is still running in the eyes of some Democrats, and we were the party that caused people depressions and things. And we were always the party of peace and the party of poverty, and they were something else. But, I would guess that having had a little experience in war myself, I didn't know what I was when I was in Italy. I wasn't anything. I wasn't a Democrat or Republican. I got into politics by accident. Democrats asked me first to run. I said, why? I don't know anything about politics. And said, well, you don't need to. You got shot, and I think we can get you elected. But I became a Republican when I learned there were twice as many Republicans in the county as Democrats.
It sounds as if then you're taking a very
great philosophical, judgment on my part.
Let's talk about the word and the issue of compassion. And there is no question going through your record that you have demonstrated compassion on a number of issues. I'd like, though, to talk about your voting record from one point of view. The National Journal has looked through those records of every senator in the year 1985. They broke the results down into 3 categories: economic, social, and foreign policy. And you were rated as more conservative on economic issues than 86% of your colleagues, in the same category as Senator Helms of North Carolina, and on social issues more conservative than 83% of your colleagues. Again, Senator Helms and Senator Garn were in that same high ranking. Isn't there a clear inconsistency between your frequent appeals for compassion and a voting record that is so conservative on the very issues that would help people who are underprivileged?
Well, again, I'd have to check those votes, but I don't know. I was the majority leader then, too, and of course we had a party position, a president's position we had to maintain. But tomorrow, for example, we celebrate Martin Luther King's birthday. I remember when that bill came to the floor, I managed it. Republican senator from the state of Kansas. We've been trying for years to get a national holiday, and it fell to me to get the bill passed. I did it. I didn't get Senator Helms' vote, a lot of other votes. We had the Genocide Convention when I was the majority. Been hanging around for 38 years to get it passed. I said, we're going to do it next year, and we did it. So I'd have to go through the issue by issue, whether it's the one chairmanship I kept when I was majority leader was Nutrition Committee, dealing with the WIC program, food stamps, school lunch, because I understand those programs, understand the need for those programs.
I think
so. You know, I think it depends. I think my record is fairly consistent. Those may be abortion votes, maybe prayer and school votes.
These are all of the votes. They went through every single vote that you had cast in 1985.
Now, I am a conservative. I'm not, you know, I don't want to suggest otherwise, but I think you can be a conservative and still be sensitive and compassionate. And if we're going to build the Republican Party as I want to build the Republican Party, then I want to reach out and bring more people in. I don't want to be hidebound. I don't want to be inflexible. And I think that's the kind of administration you would have.
Well, let's talk about that issue of leadership, which is probably the most overused word in this particular campaign from every candidate.
Not many leaders.
Your point is that you have demonstrated leadership in the Congress, and you would now like to demonstrate leadership in the White House. But is the leadership that you demonstrate in the legislative branch a transferable leadership into the White House, in your view?
I think to some extent, because the bottom line is you have to deal with Congress. I mean, presidents don't like Congresses, governors don't like state legislatures, but they're going to be there. And I think if I have any strength, and you can go to any Democrat, I think, in either body, it's getting along and dealing with members. Sometimes we can't agree. Sometimes you just say we can't agree. You don't try to work out something you can't work out. So I think it's an advantage I would have. You know, in '76, the pendulum swung. We went to outsiders. We got Jimmy Carter, who was an outsider. 4 years later, we got another outsider, Ronald Reagan. And I think now the pendulum is swinging back. The American people, regardless of their party, is saying, give me someone who understands that Congress can make it work. Less confrontation, more production, and I believe I may be the right person for the time.
Senator, I asked the question because in the White House, in addition to the art of building coalitions, which is so central on the legislative side, you are also asked as a president to inspire the American people and to set forth a vision for them, for their future. On that issue of vision, could you just very briefly tell us what yours is?
Well, I can tell you, but I think you need, it's just more than saying what it is. Everybody wants a better America, more opportunities, more security, whether it's education, whatever it may be. Again, I think you have to go back and look at my past, my legislative record. I think you're going to find in that record a consistent effort for me to make it a little better for some people, whether it's the tax code, creating more jobs, more opportunities, or whether it's food stamps to enlarge the program, working with George McGovern, which I'm criticized for by some of my conservative friends. And you kind of find the character of the person. What would this person do if he had the authority? What would he outline for America? Where does he want to be in the year 2000, whether it's foreign policy or domestic policy? And like everybody else, I want to make the world better. I want America to be stronger. I want more opportunities for young people, more jobs, better education. I want to bring in the disabled and others who've been sort of left out in the cold. So my vision is to look back after a couple of terms and say, well, Bob Dole has left, this is a better country. We're stronger. We've handled the deficit. We've dealt with some of the problems, dealing with the hungry and the homeless. And we've done it all with a conservative Republican president.
Senator, I think I asked the question because a lot of people who have covered you believe that you have, quote, a problem on this vision
one of us have
issue.
Yeah,
well, it could be. The Wall Street Journal, for example, ran the following headline over a profile last fall, which you probably remember. Ferocious ambition drives political junkie Dole but candidate lacks carefully fixed philosophy.
Otherwise, it's a very objective piece.
Now, in terms of the political junkie, I don't think that anybody would particularly argue that, and many of us in this room are as well. But it has to be more than ferocious ambition.
Oh, yeah.
Huh?
If you're driven to be president, you're not going to be very good. I mean, I think I have a lot of stamina, a lot of drive, and I love politics. And you've got to be ambitious. Show me somebody who's not ambitious, and I'll show you somebody who's not going anywhere. I don't care whether it's in education or wherever. So I plead guilty to all those. But I think sometimes you can't let the press set the pace. I mean, they were looking for a vision a year ago, and if I'd have had one, they'd have said it's no good. And we thought about a Vision of the Month Club, where we had different, so I'd have one for spring and one for the fall, just for the media.
But they would point out the inconsistency. Then.
That's right. They don't like, that's the wrong vision. I said, that's all right, I got another one. So here's another one.
Senator, if you were president, could you delegate responsibility? I ask it again because a number of people say that you keep everything terribly close to the vest, and people who have worked with you have said to me that it's tough sometimes with Dole because he can be very, very quick and sharp.
That's right. I wouldn't turn it over to some colonel. You know, I'm going to... I'm one of these who believes that if you're the boss, you ought to have all the information. If you're the President of the United States, I'm the one running for office, not Colonel North or Admiral Poindexter. They don't have a right to say what they're going to withhold from me if I'm elected president. I don't have a right to tell the American people, well, I can deny this because nobody told me what it was supposed to be. And Ronald Reagan has accepted that responsibility. So, yes, I want to delegate, but I'm not going to be like Jimmy Carter and check people in and out of the tennis court. I'm not going to go that far, but I want to know what's going on in the White House, whether it's down in the basement or upstairs.
You mentioned North and Poindexter, so I would like to ask if you agree with the Vice President, then, that they are national heroes, certainly North.
Well, I've said before, I think we toss this word hero around pretty loosely anyway these days. I don't know many heroes in my lifetime. I thought General Eisenhower was a hero, and I can name a lot of individuals out there not in politics who are heroes who saved somebody's life or done something that ought to be recognized. I think Colonel North may have been a patriot, but he's certainly not a hero. He didn't serve his president well. He didn't serve his commander-in-chief well. In my books, he's not a hero. I mean, hero is something I feel very strongly about. It's a very small group of men or women who've made an outstanding contribution. This man almost pulled down his president, or could have pulled down his president. To me, that's not, you don't get an award for excellence for that.
Senator, let's talk about foreign policy for a little while. There's a fairly widespread impression that you may be developing your views about particular foreign policy issues from the standpoint of either the Republican Party or specific partisan domestic interests rather than a very broad historical conceptual vision of America's place in the world. In other words, if it's good for the Republicans, it may be good for the United States and Bob Dole. Is that unfair?
Well, I don't know that I'd put it quite that way, but obviously when you're in the Senate, you've got one role to play. I mean, you're a legislator. You're dealing with what the president sends to you. My president, Republican, Ronald Reagan, who I think has done a good job. So, yes, I think from that standpoint, maybe it's not what's good for Republicans, it's good for everybody else, but if it's Contra policy or if it's Persian Gulf policy, then as a Republican leader, I either carry the ball or give the ball to somebody else. Sometimes you carry the ball when you don't want the ball. Mm-hmm. That's the way it works. That's the penalty of leadership.
What issues were like that?
Well, I had a few little reservations. Let's just take the Persian Gulf. Mm-hmm. You know, I couldn't quite understand. We were told by some that, well, we were going to make $5 million off each one of these ships we reflagged. That didn't seem to make much sense. We were talking about foreign policy, about getting into a very treacherous area, exposing young Americans to, to danger. Their lives were in danger. I thought we had a right to be in the Gulf. We've been there for 39 or 40 years. I don't quarrel with that. And now we've got a little more burden sharing from our allies. The policy seems to be working. But I voiced some reservations up front. I voiced some reservations even about the Contra policy. You know, I get a little troubled by the people living in plush hotels in Miami saying we ought to send more money so these 18 and 19-year-olds go out and fight. I believe in the freedom fighters. I support the policy, but I still have reservations, and I would like to see some settlement there. But and maybe what Ortega's done recently may tend to go in that direction, but I doubt it. I don't think he's very credible. So I would guess in a number of areas we've had some reservations, but in the final analysis, you can only have one president, and I may get a question on apartheid in South Africa. I saw a few people carrying little signs out there. You know, I'm not so certain sanctions are the best policy. I think our apartheid's repugnant, but I think it's also good for the Americans to speak with one voice, not the Congress speaking and the President speaking. In this particular case, the President was willing to do everything except one thing that Congress wanted, and we decided, oh, we can't do that, we'll just override his veto. So it seems to me that I understand foreign policy in a broad sense.
Senator, let's try to tick off, if we can, a couple of these issues, starting with U.S.-Soviet relations. You have described Gorbachev as the first truly modern Soviet leader, but at the same time you went on to say he is selling the same worn-out solutions. Now, if he's selling the same worn-out solutions, do you then feel that this is not a particularly propitious moment for improving U.S.-Soviet relations?
Well, I think he's selling the same solution, but he's saying he's not. I mean, he's talking about glasnost and restructuring and all these things. He's young, he's articulate, he's dynamic, even had a favorable poll rating versus Reagan when he's shaking hands with Bush up and down the street there. And not with Bush, but with people. I mean, but my view is that he's for real. He's going to be there for a while. And I don't think the issue is whether or not we trust Gorbachev. The issue is we have to continue to dialogue with the Soviet Union. We ought to have a meeting every year, not have a big summit every 3 or 4 years, a lot of expectations. We ought to have a meeting every year and say, okay, every March 1st or something, we're going to meet. And we're going to sit down and talk about our problems. We want arms reduction. It's good, and we also want to make certain we protect our interests. So anything I do with Mr. Gorbachev, is the bottom line is going to be, is it in our national interest? Not whether I trust him or don't trust him. He's there. He's for real. They're a superpower. Okay. And who knows?
Do you feel that you made a political mistake by not endorsing the medium-range missile treaty more quickly than you did?
Before I read it? That's what Bush was asking me to do. George Bush, that is. And it seemed to me that it took Ronald Reagan 3 years to negotiate the treaty. I should have 3 weeks to look at it. What I wanted to do, if I just have a minute, is to take it, check with people I had confidence in, people who are experts in nuclear weapons, and I'm not, and check with a lot of them and make a judgment. So I had a lot of visits from a lot of people. As I said last night in Hanover, I even called Margaret Thatcher. I didn't know whether she'd take my phone call or not, but apparently she'd seen the Iowa polls, and she took my call. And I wanted to make certain that they were really on board, because we were being told by some very good people in this country that we've twisted the Allies' arms. They really don't like this treaty, but she was strongly on board. I met with the Prime Minister of Italy, Prime Minister Gurria. I talked to Helmut Kohl. I talked to Richard Nixon. I talked to Gerald Ford. I talked to General Scowcroft, to General Rogers, a lot of people who've had a lot more experience than I have. And I told the President I'm ready to support the treaty. And I think we're going to have 90 votes for ratification.
All right, I want to ask you about a possible reservation. At the Dartmouth Forum, you said that the points raised by Alexander Haig were very valid. And if I understood Haig, what he was saying was that after a year and a half or halfway into the implementation phase, we would check and see what the Russians were doing on conventional forces, what they were doing on strategic forces, and if we thought that they weren't performing as we thought they should, then we would stop the implementation of that missile treaty. Is that the kind of reservation you would like to see added to the treaty during the debate in the Senate?
Well, you don't need to do that. There's already a clause in there with 6 months' notice. Either side can terminate it. It's sort of boilerplate in treaties. So it's there. I don't know if it'll be used or not.
No, but I'm talking about the year and a half to take a look at it at that particular time.
Well, there's a 3-year phase-in on removing the missiles. And if it's going to fall, I hope I hope I'm the next president, because not much is going to be done in Reagan's last year. But I'm the one, if I'm the president, going to have to make certain it's being verified, that we can verify what the Soviets do, and they're going to verify what we've done. And if we find it's not happening, then I think, yes, I think you terminate it either under those conditions. But I don't think we're going to add any reservation that would take care of Mr. Haig's problem. I think that may come in the next treaty if we get a START agreement Then we have to worry about Soviets in Afghanistan, about immigration policy, about conventional weapons in Europe. There are a whole host of things.
Okay, let's move on to SDI, the Strategic Defense Initiative. You said last summer, quote, "We can't just give it away or bargain it away or legislate it away. There is no higher priority than preserving the promise and the prospect of SDI." What do you mean, no higher priority than that? I mean, you have already ticked off very high priorities.
That was that day. I mean,
that was that day's top priority.
We were talking about defense. I think probably talking about in that context.
Would you go for deployment of SDI as quickly as you possibly could as President of the United States?
Well, as quickly as there's something to deploy. I think Jack Kemp is saying deploy now. Well, as far as I know, there's nothing there. I have, periodic briefings from General Abramson, who I think is pretty reliable. He's a pretty good source. We're not going to be looking at that until the mid-'90s. But, yes, I certainly would be willing to deploy if there's something there to do.
Okay. On the Middle East, particularly right now, the Israeli-Palestinian problem, would you have done what President Reagan did, namely to go along with the Security Council condemnation of Israel for the deportation of Palestinians?
I would have done it very reluctantly, but I think I would have done it. And I think there's excessive force there.
And as President, what specific steps would you take to use American influence to promote a settlement between the Israelis and the Palestinians?
Well, obviously, everything you could do, but I think if we look back at the Camp David Accord, it probably wasn't so much it was one of the finest hours that President Carter had, but really we had Anwar Sadat and Menachem Begin. They made the difference. We had leaders in Egypt and Israel who were willing to come together and reach an agreement. I'm not certain we have that now, but as I said last night also in the debate, every time there's a downside, maybe there's an upside. With all these problems in Gaza and the West Bank and the Israelis being taunted by the radicals and the Israelis probably using too much force, maybe there's an opportunity for a role of the United States.
Any specific ideas that you have?
Well, first you have, and I assume as Al Haig corrected me, he said, well, I think there are already some things going on. I don't know what they are. I have not been told by Secretary Schultz or the President. But if we can bring the parties together, let's start the process. Let's just start a process. And I don't think we need to include the Soviets in it either.
Okay, let's talk about what would happen if you were president on the domestic side. You have said that one of the first things you would do, if not the first thing, is bring together the leaders of the Congress and hammer out a settlement that would bring some kind of resolution on the budget deficit question. Could you share with us what specific steps, what would be your vision of that kind of domestic settlement?
I think one thing we can agree on, just knowing the members of Congress as I do, and I think that's a big advantage for someone like myself. I know the Democrats, I know the Republicans, I think I know their limits, I think I know precisely, what they would tell me. I think we'd agree on a freeze.
A year, 2, 3?
Well, it depends. If you want to freeze get all technical, freeze budget authority, you'd need more than a one-year freeze. If you freeze outlays, a one-year freeze would save you about $50 billion the first year, 150 over 3 years. And I think that's something we can work out. And they might not want to go for a freeze on outlays. That means how much is actually spent. But there's the room for compromise there, because even as we were talking about deficit reduction last year in late December, I think there were about 28 senators, about 14 in each party, who took to the Senate floor and said, we'll support a one-year freeze. And these were people like Joe Biden on the Democratic side, Nancy Kassebaum, my colleague, and other very credible Republicans and Democrats.
Is this the major element then in a Dole package, would be that one-year freeze?
That's fairly major, too, because I don't think we need to, I like a lot of other things, line item veto and balanced budget. But I think we have to start. Congress has to start. I think we could start and reach some agreement on some option of a freeze. Maybe it's a freeze plus 1%. Maybe everybody gets a 2% raise. But that's saving real money. No increase in taxes, but real savings.
Okay, now let me get to that taxes issue. George Bush says that no tax increases under any circumstances. Jack Kemp says essentially the same thing. You seem to be saying under some circumstances, possibly.
I did.
Huh?
Hope not.
I said you seem to be saying under some circumstances an increase in taxes. If I'm wrong in that, just tell me. I mean, under no circumstances, no tax increases?
I said as specific as I can, we don't need to raise tax rates. We had tax reform in '86.
Yes,
took a lot of things away from a lot of people in this audience. Said, don't worry about it, we're going to lower your rates. No sooner we've done that, we ought to freeze the rates. We ought to raise the rates. let's let the rates trigger in at the lowest possible rate. We can still do a lot of things to get revenue if we have to have revenue. Don't change the rates on individuals or businesses. They can't operate that way.
But an oil import tax, for example, would be something you could support now.
I could support under certain conditions, rebate and heating oil, use the extra money to increase the so-called petroleum reserve, and I think that would be a good investment.
Let me ask you one thing on this also, which I was curious about in the Dartmouth debate. Kemp spoke about morning in America, and then you quickly came on and you said high noon in America. And I was just wondering, what is the distinction you were trying to draw there?
Well, I'm from out west, Dodge City's in my state. And we use the term high noon. That's the time to get ready and do something. It takes a while to get up in the morning, And we've already been there. We need to deal with a deficit right now. It's high noon in America. It's time we sat down together and say, okay, we're going to hammer out the deficit reduction package. We stay here all week or 2 weeks. We're not being fair to our children, our grandchildren, people in this school, people who may be viewing us. They expect more from us.
Senator, for a minute or two before we go to the audience for their questions, you have had a kind of off-again, on-again spat with the Vice President for the last couple of weeks in this campaign. And I'd like to ask whether there's anything personal between the two of you or if the differences on issues.
I think I have a feeling we both want the same office.
And so what does that mean exactly? What are the differences between you then?
Well, I mean, the stakes are pretty high, and, he was supposed to be the nominee. And that was all laid out already. And there wasn't any alternative. And I kept saying, I think there is an alternative. And I'm trying to be that alternative, and I'm pushing very hard. But I've never said anything derogatory or critical of him as a person. I've said he doesn't have a record. And I'm talking about a voting record. He doesn't have a record, a legislative record. But he's got a good resume. And we're making this is a national job application we've made. And everybody has a chance to make recommendations. I think I'm a leader who can make a difference. And so that's not personal.
On the issue of the Iran-Contra scandal, the Vice President has said, quote, I believe nobody here is going to do anything but tear down the President, tear down the party, and further add to the Democratic fuel by continuing to debate this, the Iran-Contra scandal. The questions have been answered, unquote. Do you believe that all of the questions concerning the Vice President's role in this particular scandal have in fact been raised and answered to your satisfaction?
Well, again, I've never looked at it from that I think the Vice President's right. I think the Iran-Contra thing died about 6 months ago. And there isn't that much interest. A lot of people are concerned. They're concerned about the institution. They're concerned about the presidency. The president accepted responsibility. I said it's an issue of credibility. How many positions can you have? First you're in the loop, then you're not in the loop, then you weren't at the meeting, then Schultz and somebody says you were in the meeting. All I said it would be in the Vice President's interest is to lay it all out there. I'm not,
Well, have you laid it all out as an announcement?
I don't know. I mean, I don't want to be critical of the Vice President.
You don't?
Not my nature, no.
I see. Do you feel that he lacks credibility on this issue?
Well, I think there is a question of credibility. I mean, let's face it. If Bob Dole gets up, you've already questioned me on some things where my credibility made a mistake, that I vote like Jesse Helms. Do I really vote like Jesse Helms? I mean, that you're questioning, not very nicely. No, am I?
Not very nicely?
No, very nicely.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Can I be compassionate and be with Jesse Helms? My answer is yes. So, I think we're all going to be questioned on credibility, and we've got to be credible. The American people want to believe in someone. They want to believe that I don't care how he voted, can he justify it? They may be liberals, Democrats, conservatives, Republicans, but in the final analysis, the bottom line is the American people want somebody they can believe in, somebody who might even be an inspiration in some way.
Okay, well, some of the American people are in the audience now, Senator, so I'll stop asking questions and allow them to begin. I know that there are 3 people in the audience who are going to ask questions. I don't know specifically what they're going to ask. I don't know what anyone else is going to ask either. There are microphones conveniently set up on this level and in the balcony. If you wish to ask a question, just ask a question. They'll make a speech. Senator, the briefer your responses, the more questions we'll get to. Our first questioner, that's right. Yep.
Not the Mansfield response.
Not quite.
Yes, no.
Our first questioner is Ernest May, a professor of history here at Harvard who knows a good deal about how the U.S. government works. Professor May?
Senator, I wanted to ask a little bit more about your sense of how you would manage the executive branch. You said that you would not delegate as much as President Reagan has, but you wouldn't micromanage as President Carter did. And I wonder how you think about borrowing from other presidents, the extent to which you might think that your style of managing the executive branch might resemble Mr. Nixon's or President Eisenhower's or some Democrats, Franklin Roosevelt's or someone else's.
Well, you know, as I look back over the presidents that I've known and the ones that I've been able to observe, I came in when John Kennedy was inaugurated, didn't have that much contact with President Kennedy, though he had a lot of bright people around him. I think right up front you've got to bring people into government who really are enthusiastic about giving of themselves. You know, it's not the dollars involved. You need to pay people. Some people who are very able have to be paid, obviously. Others are willing to give 2 or 3 years of their life to service, public service. So you start by getting the very best people you can to serve in your cabinet. You're going to know pretty much who you want as your chief of staff. And that's my premise. And I don't have anybody out in Russell, Kansas wanting to get in the cabinet. So we don't have a big cadre of people in Russell ready to move into the White House if I get elected. So there are no cronies out there that I know of, put it that way. So I would start on that premise. Second, it has to be understood right up front that nothing is withheld from the president. After all, Harry Truman was right, the buck stops here. I think President Reagan was sort of the cabinet council approach. It was a pretty good approach, where you have different cabinet members. If they have any jurisdiction over any subject matter, they get together and they kick it around a while, and then they make recommendations to the president. But you've got to use your cabinet. You see, maybe you want people that you can rely on. I'm not an expert on everything. I think I'm a pretty good issues person, so I would want that. I think from management style, I watched Jerry Ford pretty closely. I think despite what happened to Richard Nixon, he brought a lot of good people into government, and a lot of them weren't involved in Watergate. We always hear about those who were. He had a very good management style. I think Ronald Reagan has a management style that's a little different than others. I tend to be more hands-on. I wouldn't want to be, as you indicate, I wouldn't want to hold on to everything. But I think the American people expect us to have a pretty good idea of what's going on. And if we see something happening in the Department of Transportation or the Defense Department that's an outrage, then I ought to deal with it myself, or at least call in the cabinet officer.
The next question here is from a student at the Kennedy School.
Yes. I represent a group here at the school which is concerned with disability issues. You mentioned your desire to address the needs of disabled people earlier. Given that 2/3 of our current working-age disabled people are neither working nor looking for work, how would you plan to, through programs, legislation, reform, etc., to change our current disability policies in the areas of employment or education, etc.?
Thank you. Well, I don't want to sound self-serving this, but I think just having me in the White House would change the attitudes of a lot of people. I think you'd have a lot of private sector people willing to take a look at people with disabilities. Not that mine's very severe, but I've had one. So I think I could help just from the standpoint of sort of being in the bully pulpit and letting people know that there are 35 million Americans out there with disabilities who are just like the rest of us. Maybe they can't talk, maybe they can't walk, but they can think and they can produce. So you start on that basis. In addition, I'd want to take a look at all the federal programs, make certain that disabled Americans are given opportunities in the federal government as far as hiring is concerned, every other opportunity everybody else has. So I'd try to set a standard myself and make people adhere to it.
Thank you. The next question in the balcony, please.
Thank you. Senator Dole, by all accounts, you fought bravely during World War II, and you sustained a serious war wound, which you just referred to in Italy. Therefore, I ask you, having seen the horrors of war, how do you sleep at night, given your active support of South African-backed insurgents in Mozambique, who carried out numerous massacres, including that at Hormoine in July, where over 400 men, women, and children were hacked to death?
Well, I don't know how this all got started, that I'm somehow supporting Renamo. What I said a year ago in a letter, I think about a year ago, I'd have to dig it up, that we ought to use any structure there to get food to the starving people. That's all I've done. I haven't supported the, quote, freedom fighters. I'm not certain there are freedom fighters. I think these are some of Eon Smith and others' leftovers. So that's not been one area that I've been out front on, quote, freedom fighters for Mozambique. I think that's been misconstrued because the nomination of Melissa Wells was held up for several months. But I voted for her nomination. Robert Byrd was a majority leader, could have called it up at any time. We held it up thinking that, in this case, Senator Helms and Secretary Schultz could work out their differences. They couldn't do that. So I think somebody's misstated my position.
The next question here, please.
Senator Dole, what do you think we should do with our problematic nuclear power plants? We have Wolf Creek in your home state. In the East Coast, we have the Shoreham and Seabrook nuclear power plants. Do you think that these plants, which are completed but not yet operating, should operate? And secondly, do you think that the electric utility industry should be deregulated so that we can avoid similar problems like this in the future?
I think one thing we ought to do from now on, if when we license another nuclear plant, we ought to have the evacuation plan agreed to before we grant the license, instead of the reverse. That's why we're in trouble in Seabrook. I've said, as far as Seabrook is concerned, there is a perception in this country that the Nuclear Regulatory Commission is in bed with the industry. That may or may not be right. I don't have any evidence to say it's right. But if it's even a concern, then I suggest we bring in the National Academy of Sciences, let them take a look at the evacuation plan. They're nonpartisan, they're non-government, they're experts, and they've already agreed in a letter to me, say they'd be happy to do that as far as Seabrook's concerned, or Wolf Creek or anything else.
Senator, our next questioner is John Bender, who's a member of the Student Advisory Committee of the Institute of Politics.
Yeah. Good Kansas name.
Senator Dole, I want to go back to the issue of the budget deficit. A budget freeze is still not going to reduce the budget deficit because you still have the interest to worry about. And a lot of investors throughout the world are going to wonder if that's really going to restore confidence. Do you have any additional specific measures to tackle the budget deficit that is going to actually reduce it as opposed to prevent it from getting worse? Value-added tax, corporation tax, cuts in social spending, anything else?
Well, you know, I agree that the freeze is not the best policy. I mean, if I could have my way for a couple of days as president, I could figure out a pretty good budget if I didn't have to send it to Congress. You know, and we could reduce spending and send the right signals around the world. But the budget freeze is fair. I find most Americans, regardless of party, and I have a lot of support from independents and Democrats, most Americans that say if this is fair and across the board, the only exception would be low income, food stamps, Medicaid, WIC, whatever, older Americans programs. Then I think we send a signal. If we have $150 billion in real savings over a 3-year period, we're sending a strong signal to the markets and a strong signal around the world. Best policy would be to go in and kick out the bad programs, maybe increase the others. But, you know, the interest is now 14% of the budget. It's gone up from 7 to 14% in the last 7 years. The debt's almost $2.5 trillion, $200 billion in interest. We've got to deal with it, or we're robbing our children and our grandchildren from opportunities they should have in the future.
Next question in the balcony, please.
Senator, in last week's Iowa debate, you said that S2, the current campaign spending legislation to limit special interest PAC contributions, was not a PAC bill, when in fact, if S2 had been in effect in the 1986 election, it would have cut PAC contributions to all 1986 Senate candidates by 2/3 from 45 million to 16 million.
Could you get to your question, please?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's an important one, though. It's very important.
How can you say that you're for campaign reform when you have been blocking the effort with a filibuster?
Well, it takes 40 people to carry out a filibuster, and I'm only one. So I see the pickets around, and I appreciate all the attention Common Cause has given me. But I think they overestimate my importance. I'm for campaign reform. When it costs $15 or $16 million to run for the United States Senate in any state, then we've got to take a look at it. I'm not for public financing. I don't think we reduce PACs enough in S2. We're working with Senator Bourne. We think we're going to get a campaign reform bill in 1988. But I'd be willing to say there's one other thing about S2 you should understand. I don't know your party affiliation. Hopefully it's a Republican. But if you live in the South where you're outnumbered 4 to 1, 5 to 1, 6 to 1. S2 says you can only spend X dollars. They put a cap on how much you can spend. You might as well tell the Republican Party in the South, you're never going to elect anybody. You know, you get 5 to 1 registration against you. You can't spend more money. You can't go out and create enthusiasm. And in effect, S2 is a perpetuity bill for the Democrats in parts of this country. You give me a state where it's 50% Republican, 50% Democrat, then let's put a cap on it. But we want competition in politics. So I think we can get a campaign reform bill, but it may not be quite like S2. And Barry Goldwater doesn't support S2 anymore. I forgot to say that in the Iowa debate last week because of those problems.
Next question right here, please.
Senator Dole, anti-Americanism is very much alive and well in Canada. It is being fed by the Polar Sea incident, the failure to deliver on acid rain legislation, and also the failure to recognize the cultural sovereignty issue that is very important to Canadians. What will you do as president to shore up our relationship with the Canadians and avoid them being driven to the very anti-American NDP?
Well, I haven't thought much about that except in the acid rain area, and I think we've had enough study of acid rain. It's time we get together on a program, and I could go into some powerful forces in the United States Senate who want to let that legislation come up. But, you know, Canada, right now there's some positive things. The free trade agreement, in my view, is an excellent opportunity to build better relationship with Canada. I support the free trade agreement. I think it's going to be adopted by the Congress, and it's going to be adopted by the Parliament in Canada.
Next question in the balcony, please.
Thank you. Senator Dole, as I understand it, the Senate Committee on Environment and Public Works recently suggested reauthorization of the Clean Air Act. Senator Byrd has come out against this bill. When it comes to the floor, what will be your position, and what is your position on the environment in general?
See, Senator Byrd opposes the bill because it ties in the last question. He feels strongly about acid rain. I can understand. He's from West Virginia. And he's fearful we're not going to have a balanced program. That we're going to close a lot of coal mining plants in his district or his state. So he wants clean coal technology before we get into all this acid rain and how many tons of emissions we reduce each year. What we did in the final days of the session last year, an amendment by Senator Mitchell from Maine, we extended the Clean Air Act for 8 months. It doesn't expire until August. I would hope when that extension is over, we can really get into all the issues. But let's face it, it's an election year. I've got a feeling it's going to be another extension in the 1989, and then I'll be in a position to send a program up to Congress.
Next question right here, please.
Yeah, Senator Dole, the Republican Party, as you know, has had a problem, maybe an image problem, regarding insensitivity towards the poor, the disadvantaged. We hear people like Senator Paul Simon say things about going back to New Deal type programs, social spending, those kinds of things. People like Al Haig say, well, I favor education. Yeah, I'll speed it up. What specifically as president would you do to help the poor and disadvantaged?
Thank you. Well, again, I think it gets back to the vision question Marvin asked me, and I think you can look, you know what Bob Dole's going to do based on my record. I'm not going to let somebody go hungry or homeless in America. That's a tragedy. It can't happen in America. If there's nobody else to do it, the federal government's going to do it. I'm going to have a daycare program. We've got a lot of low and middle income women with no place to take their children. I also want to encourage the private sector to get into more daycare. We've got another problem called long-term health care. We can pay for the daycare thing by cutting out that nice little tax credit that goes up to $80,000. So we can do a lot of things without spending more money, and we can do them in the Republican Party. There is that perception that somehow we don't care about the people at the bottom, those who have been left out, or the down and out. We only care about those at the top. That's not an accurate perception. And again, I think someone like myself, and I don't have much, but I've made it the hard way and had a few bumps in my lifetime, can sort of, set the tone for the administration and the party.
Question next in the balcony, please.
Thank you. Senator Dole, you proposed here in this room a budget freeze across the board to deal with the deficit. Yet at the same time, a budget freeze does not really deal with the issue of priorities. The whole reason we elect people to our government to set priorities. Education, human services, and even the State Department have been cut under Reagan, while defense has skyrocketed to unprecedented heights. Do you honestly believe that a freeze is good public policy? I mean, are we electing you to freeze the budget or to set our priorities?
Now, as I said, it's not the best policy, but we've got something that has to be dealt with. It's called the deficits. $2.5 trillion is going to go up to $3 trillion if we don't deal with it, and some say $10 trillion before we get to deal with it. Now, my policy would be to go through each program, kick out the bad, increase the good. Then you're never going to get that done in 1989. I think I've got about 6 or 9 months as president in 1989 to start something, and I would start with a freeze to start the action. It is high noon in America. Then we can go back to what you suggest, because you're absolutely right.
Next question right here, please.
On the trade deficit issue, you've said that you believe in, quote, opening markets, not closing them, and you've opposed some protectionist legislation. Yet presidents and congressmen have been saying this for years, and the trade deficit has grown to huge proportions. What specifically would you do to open markets, and would this make a serious dent in the deficit?
You know, I believe in access, and I believe in open markets where countries have competitive products. They ought to come into our country if we can get into their markets, if we're competitive, if they're open and accessible. That's the big hang-up. So Senator Byrd and I put an amendment in the trade bill that says if there's a persistent pattern of unfair trade practices and the president won't act, Congress can act. So what we're looking for is something in the nature of reciprocity, not total. We want the Japanese to know, and our friends in the European community know, that it's a two-way street. And I think a lot of it's just going to be sitting down the next Alliance Summit and talking about, we're not going to accept just another Japanese plan. We want concrete actions. They've opened up their markets. We want the British and the West Germans to stimulate their economy so they can buy more of our product, and a lot of things of that kind.
Gentleman right here, please.
Senator Dole, although very many legislators have expressed interest in some form of national catastrophic health insurance that would include provisions for custodial care, have you any specific ideas exactly as how might such a program be administered, and what provisions for funding, say payroll taxes, might make such a program affordable for all Americans?
You're talking about long-term care?
Yes, sir.
Now, we don't want to limit it just custodial care, just because we get old.
I meant it would include custodial care.
Right.
Any program would do it.
You might want adult daycare. You might want home health care. I mean, because we get old, we still ought to have options. And you shouldn't just be everything in an institution. It's not in the catastrophic bill that we passed in the Senate that I think is going to be signed by the president later on because of the cost. We're going to have to get these young people around I see all over the place when they go to work, set aside a little money in a payroll deduction plan to take care of their long-term health care. Medicare doesn't cover long-term health care. And a lot of older people are going to find out they've got to spend down. In other words, go down to Medicaid, down to poverty to get any benefit. We found in some states people who are happily married for 50 years have to get a divorce to qualify for long-term health care. Shouldn't happen in America. So it's going to cost a little money, but we need to start working with the private sector, the insurance sector, to make certain the young people are going to have it when they reach 65, 70 years of age.
Next question from the balcony, please.
Yes, Senator Dole. Many people in the Republican Party, particularly conservatives, question your dedication to conservative goals. For example, in comparing you to Jack Kemp, one conservative leader said, Jack Kemp is a conservative, Bob Dole is a politician.
Who said that?
I believe it was Sandy Schulte, last year's CPAC.
That's the question, please.
Do you see a problem in trying to convince the conservative movement that you are one of them, and at the same time retaining your appeal to moderates?
Well, you know, I'm trying to appeal to Americans, and I think most Americans tend to be moderate to conservative. And I don't have any quarrel with Jack Kemp, but somebody has to govern. You know, I listen to Jack and Pete DuPont in the debate. They're against everything. You know, we're not for this, we're not for this, we're not for... Well, what are they for? How are you going to send out Social Security checks if you didn't vote for the 83 Social Security Act? Jack said, oh, let the economy take care of it. You got to... We live in the real world. There are people with real problems. I think my record is conservative. It's a good conservative record. I've supported the president's tax reduction. I fought off efforts to repeal the third year of the tax cut, but I closed a lot of loopholes. And if I find a loophole where somebody's getting an unintended tax break, some big company or some big individual, I'll close it. That isn't raising taxes. That's equity. How are you going to get the American people to pay their taxes if they find some big corporation, as we did in 1982, getting millions and millions of dollars in refunds through safe harbor leasing, which is a fraud, almost.
Our last questioner is Marshall Goldman, a professor of economics at Wellesley College and Associate Director of the Russian Research Center here at Harvard. Professor Goldman.
First, let me say, Marvin, I want to thank you on behalf of all the viewers for having this idea. That you didn't ask me to do that, but I want to thank you for it. It's a wonderful idea to add to our program. But my question is, Senator, Marvin mentioned that you initially were critical of the INF agreement. Yet I came just across a transcript of a press conference that took place during the summit, when just after you had met with General Secretary Gorbachev. Senator Dole said, Senator Byrd's timetable is realistic. Some Republicans may want it to take longer. I congratulate you, Mr. Gorbachev, on the treaty. We'd like a big vote on the treaty. We may need to bring your people along. Then you became critical. Is that the way to conduct relations with the Soviets? Give them one signal, then say publicly to give another signal. Which is the real Senator Dole?
No, I think there was more to it than that. In fact, there was an effort to get Bob Dole on board while Gorbachev was in town. And I told Mr. Gorbachev, I tried to arrange a private meeting with him. I couldn't do it. Again, I think we told him how things were going in Iowa. And we were able to see him for a few moments. But I told him I thought the treaty was going to be ratified. Never any doubt in my mind about the treaty being ratified. But before Bob Dole got on board as the Republican leader, because one thing about a leader, you've got to convince your colleagues. And once I came on board, I think 3 days later, I took 10 Republican senators down to see Ronald Reagan and said, Mr. President, here are 10 votes for you. And I think that's leadership. I told Mr. Gorbachev it was going to be ratified whether Bob Dole was on board or not. But I wanted to check with Margaret Thatcher and Helmut Kohl and the Prime Minister of Italy and some other people I knew quite well. So the answer is I think I did it right. I hope to see Mr. Gorbachev again. Next time he'll have breakfast with me.
Well, Senator, I want to thank you very much. Our time's up.
Thank you.
And I'd like to thank all of you. I'd like to thank all of you for being with us today. And now just a final comment. This is our last program in the Candidates 88 series. We've been able to bring you all of the candidates one at a time, all of them except the Vice President. The purpose all along has been to give you, the voter, a better feel, a better understanding of the whole political field, including the person who may well be the next President of the United States. And we hope, at least in that respect, we've succeeded. And now on behalf of the Joan Shorenstein Barone Center on the Press, Politics, and Public Policy here at the John F. Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University, I am Marvin Kalb saying goodbye and good luck and good voting.